Susan Donovan, facilitator, NLP expert, 30 years in the neuroscience world. And in talking to Susan beforehand, I asked her kind of what was her take on this, and she spoke about how passionate she is about helping people unlock their inner and their outer sales game. And I think the inner sales game has really come through in Bernadette's presentation there. So quick round of applause for Susan, please. And also Bridget, who John's already introduced and many of you know. Beforehand, I had a quick chat with Bridget as well and asked her what was her interest in this area. And she talked about the rise of AI and what it's going to require for all of us to be relevant and to be employed for the next 5 or 10 years. And again, I think a lot of that came through from Bernadette's presentation. So a quick round of applause for Bridget, and then we'll get into questions. Now, I have a couple of questions, but I might throw to the room first. Is there any questions that you have for Bernadette on what she presented this morning, or even perspectives that you have on some of the content that she shared? Yes, I'll hand you the mic.
Thank you. A question for you, Bernadette, and thank you for the wonderful talk. The 3 types of individual around attitudes towards money, in your opinion, are you born that way? Are they instinctive, or have you seen people successfully manage transition from a 1 or 2 into the third option, which is obviously the optimal way?
Yeah, good question. A lot of it's our conditioning. I mean, I don't know if we're born with it or not, but I definitely know conditioning forms a huge part of it. From an experience of somebody moving from one to another, that's myself. So I can tell you now that, my background is 20 years at Xerox, Kodak and Computer Associates, so I've had some pretty good pedigree training. And I think back to some of the competitions that we had in the sales arena. I would always get my revenue targets, but if we had gates, like if we had certain gates, you had to sell X amount of that big product, X amount of the medium, and X amount of the small, I would always miss out on whatever was going because I never sold enough of the big ones. And it wasn't until I became aware of all of this that I thought, hand on the forehead moment again, it's like, my God, if I had have been aware that there was such a thing as a money weakness, I would have changed way back then. So now I don't have an issue. I hold my price. I know my value. And I teach that. I teach how to do that as well. So it's a learned thing. It's like any habit. It's like any belief where we shift that belief. Yeah, hope that answered the question for you.
Another question? Yep.
Again, a question for Bernadette. I'm in an industry, the IT industry, like yourself, which has gone through a transition. We were talking about the times when you'd wait by a fax machine for the orders to come in. And nowadays it's a different climate. And in a tendency when an industry's on the back foot, you become much more of a giver because you're much more questioning your thing, your value. How do you remember your value in an environment that's tougher than it was in the past?
Wow, that is a good question. And once again, I think it comes back to, I've gone through it, you've probably gone through it yourself, where we've questioned the value and we've questioned everything about what we're doing. And I think that if you've got the right people around you to start with, and you're continually being reminded, or you're actually being brave enough to go out there regardless and share that value. And if you feel that you have to drop your price, strategically that's okay. If there's a strategic reason, if it's a seeding opportunity, whatever, if there's a strategic reason, that's fine. But I think that if you're dropping your price purely because of desperation, then that's going to show through. And your value is not going to be demonstrated. So you may lose a deal because you're more expensive from maybe that's the customer's belief, but you're always going to win as well. So does that make sense? Yeah.
I might get Bridget to share her thoughts on that question as well. You were talking about the, waiting by the fax machine. Bridget told me a little story this morning about handing over a letter to the typing pool and having them type it. And so I think
probably me.
what are your thoughts on how do you do that? How do you, maintain your value?
Yeah, I think most people in this room are in B2B sales, I'm pretty sure. One of the things that I'm really passionate about is the value that you bring to every conversation, and sometimes that's the value of connections with inside the vendor community of the customer you're selling to. So I think of value as a lot more than just intrinsically attached to the product or service that you're selling, but what's the value you're bringing to that customer? How are you connecting that customer to customers? And then I think that kind of elevates you well above just the price to the value of the relationship with you as a person and you and your company.
Sue?
Yeah, I think back to the CEB research from 2015, where they found for the first time the reason most B2B salespeople are successful to 53% level wasn't actually because of the product or the price, it was because they made the customer smarter through the selling process. And that's what customers really valued. And just to what Bridget was saying, and what they mean by, in that context, the value is actually insights. The customer gains so many insights through being sold to that's who they decided to buy from.
Yeah. I just want to quickly chime in on that as well. I think the thing about value is in the eye of the beholder. And so it actually stems from the discovery work we do and the conversations and the curiosity that Bernadette spoke about. The more of that we bring at the start, the more insights it gives us to allow us to then find a way to connect up our product or our service or our solution to something that's meaningful for them, and that's where the value is created. If we don't do that piece well, we miss out on that. We're just throwing mud against the wall and hoping it'll stick. And
I think also today we are playing the long game more than ever. And so the fax days when the orders would come through, you'd get a one call does it all or whatever it might be. It's different. And so if you can go to market in a reputable way, which is why the SMA is all here, because we're wanting to elevate the level of the professionalism of sales. I know for a fact that I've made contact with prospects, say 3 years ago. Now, they've not bought from me yet, but we have regular coffees, and it's not just turning up with the Dunkin' Donuts. It's actually having really good conversations. Now, I may not get business from them at their role now, but they've referred me on. So it is the long game that I think that we're playing, and that comes back to the value that you have in yourself as well.
Bernadette, JD here from Catalyst Consulting. I'm interested in the intersection between the challenger sale concepts from CEB, in particular the relationship person who doesn't want to harm the relationship, and money. Is there a correlation between the two?
Yeah, good question. So we know that with the challenger sale that relationship builders are 7% we know that. There are different kinds of relationship builders though, in my mind. So we do have the relationship salespeople that do just front up and want to build the relationship, but they don't have the insights, or they don't have the smarts to have the different kinds of conversations, and they're our buyer doesn't want them just as much as they don't want the guy coming in to get his energy off the hunt. And I think that the challenger mindset, the challenger persona, if you like, is that person that does have the healthy relationship with their own value and with money and with everything else. So I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Greg Simmons from Blackboard. Bernadette, interested in your comments around where the traditional sales processes of spin, customer-centric selling, solution selling, where you see them fitting in this world?
So one of my models that I do have, the conscious selling model, is based on our approach to market, the focus of our conversations and the outcomes. But going across the bottom is like sales 1.0, sales 2.0, sales 3.0. So we have been taught like years back how to make contact with the buyer, go in with your brochure, spill the guts on your features, advantage, benefit, and then close for the sale. Sales 1.0 is very transactional. Then in the 80s, we came and we were consultative selling, spin, PSS, all of those came through. So that's the second layer, and that is where you learn to connect and consultative questions, and also conspiring for the success for the client as well. I believe we've reached a new level, and that's sales 3.0 for me, and that's going in, learning how to go to market in a total state of conviction. It's being able to have conversations that are elevated to a real contextual, being able to contextualize something. And it's having that outcome of pure contribution, but not from a giving money perspective, but a contribution perspective. So that's my conscious selling model, and that's kind of where I play at that level. So we need the basics. We need the spin. We need the next bit up. So that's where I say we have frameworks, but we dance within the frameworks.
So as a Miller Hyman
Yes,
expert, I
Miller
thought I'd let you
Hyman,
chime in here.
Pathway Achieve Global Master Trainer. I have a perspective on this, and yeah, I've been doing this for many years, and definitely I'm talking more and more about the inner game as well as the outer game, because people want to know how to plan, and they have to put in that work. And a lot of course what we're talking about with these different methodologies is results in a really great planning sheet, but then you have to be able to apply that so specifically these days to a customer and to become a consultant. And you need this consciousness, this purpose, and that has to become part of your planning process. So from my perspective, I don't see it as that different, but I think over the years I'm spending more time talking about how to have the conversation, not just what to have the conversation about.
Yeah. Bridget, what about you as a senior sales leader in terms of balancing all of those different methodologies that we've all been exposed to throughout our careers with the slightly more human component? How do you strike that balance for your team?
Yeah, I think in a lot of solution selling these days, it requires a team. And some of the best benefit you can get through those approaches and methodologies is common vernacular. And it really speeds up the process and the conversation with inside a business. And it also means that it's not under 7 soccer where you're all crowded around the ball, but you do actually have a plan that you can actually implement. Interestingly enough, we have an app that can help you with that as well. But I think it's part of the conversation that I always get with customers because of I like to think of it as augmented intelligence, and not artificial intelligence. But will there be a role for salespeople? And you talked about that. And I'm consciously always saying if all you are doing is something that can be automated, then clearly you're going to be one of those people that doesn't have a job. So I think the methodologies are great. I'm a massive Blue Sheet fan. But I think the real value in the conversation. And the other thing I'll say, something else that's changing, and not just because we're a subscription model business ourselves, but it's about the customer success. And the organisations and the people that are focused on the success of their customer after they buy, I think that's also part of the next level.
Absolutely.
Yep, I'll come to you and I'll come down the end.
Thanks. Thank you very much. It was a great talk.
Thank you.
Here we are. We've got a sales team of 5 or 50 or 500. 60% of them are money givers. I'm not sure what the other percentages are. Is it possible to take those 60% and pull them up to a different level?
There's some good questions. Theoretically, yes.
Yeah.
It depends on a few factors. It depends on how coachable they are. It depends on how open they are to shifting the way they think about themselves. And some people won't take feedback, and some people can't take feedback. So, whether how coachable they are, how trainable they are, that forms a part, again, another component as to their willingness and how, we can say to people, who wants to be successful? And everyone will put their hand up. But you ask the question, who wants to be successful in selling and do what you have to do that, and less people do it. So
We need a test for coachability.
you absolutely do.
There was a
I can
question
help you.
down this end of the room. Yeah.
Hi, Bridget. Brilliant as always. Thank you very much. I'm interested, we're talking about individuals and managing yourself, but there's also, I think, a degree of pressure from some companies in terms of short-term goals. And I definitely know that there's a lot of discounting and giving away at end of quarter and end of year. How do you fit together the pressures from companies to behave in one particular way versus the individual mandate?
It's like anything. The fish rots from the head down, and I think that it's leadership, and there's just a whole new kind of way of going to market today, which is gaining more and more momentum, and that is around the conscious capitalism, the B Corp, Game Changer 500 businesses where they're starting to look at customer experience, at purpose. So that whole, I think it's still out there, it's still rampant, it certainly is. The customers know better, and I tell this story that I was working at Xerox and I had quite quite a large account, and I'd been working on them for about a year. And it was the end of the financial year. And the managing director and my sales manager said, off you go, take the contract again. There'd been a number of carrots dangled throughout the year. And so I fronted up at the print room and had the director there and the print room manager. And I said, I had the contract, and I said, you know why I'm here, guys? Had the contract in my hand, and I said, but I'm not going to ask you to sign it. And they said to me, word for word, Bernadette, we're so glad to hear you. Had you have asked us again, you would never have got any business. Now, it took 6 weeks longer, and I got a $500,000 deal. So I guess what I'm saying there is intuition also plays a huge part. And these are all competencies that we're not taught. It's a values alignment as well. So I hope that helps.
Just jump in, Bernadette, on that. You said something I thought that was very pertinent in your slide about saying no sometimes to customers.
Yeah.
Sometimes that's something we need to be able to do internally as well, which is not
Totally.
always easy to do, but having the strength to stand your ground if it's in the customer's best interest.
Absolutely.
Yeah, Bridget?
Yeah, and before I answer that, it actually reminded me, I have a sister called Bernadette, and one of my brother's friends gets us mixed up all the time and calls us both Bridgette, so maybe we could do that. But I think for me, that, we talk about the role of a salesperson moving forward. To answer your question, I think that's the role of the sales leader.
Yeah.
So I have one of my amazing sales guys in the room here today. But what I try and do is weather that storm about the monthly and the quarterly, and hopefully not the annual number being missed, but I try and weather that storm and really focus on the great work that the individuals in my team are doing. Mm. And I think that's one way that managers can keep their job. Mm.
Yeah, well said.
I have a question as well. I thought what you shared today was fascinating, but some of the statistics around the amount of anxiety and depression within this industry that was pretty impactful. And given my background and career, it's something I've been exposed to. I'm just interested. You shared some really great strategies for individuals to take responsibility for looking after themselves a little bit better. What about at an organizational level? What onus responsibility should we be putting back on employers to recognize those catalysts for stress and pressure and help to ease the burden?
I think I know something that I work with leaders, and I make sure that the leaders really align themselves with their people from a personal perspective. What is it that gets their people out of bed in the morning? How can they align their people's personal aspirations with the company's goals? So really get into tune with their values. And I think that if a leader can do that and can understand where their people's weaknesses and strengths are, and start to, instead of having, go for a walk, have your one-on-one walking around the park, get out in the fresh air, take your team on, it doesn't need to be a junket. It can be, maybe you might like junkets, but, just something to start to educate people into the importance of that side of things, but the leader's got to lead it.
Yeah, great answer. One last question.
Hi, Kristen from LinkedIn. First of all, I just want to say thank you so much. This has been really, really interesting. And I guess this is just kind of looking into 2018. So at LinkedIn, we have a lot of data showing that most decision makers are going to be moving in January, which probably means that sales management here and directors will experience turnover within their teams. So when we look at this money maker mindset, how in interviews would you start to ask these really intimate questions about money to bring in the right talent and kind of make that shift?
There are lots of different questions that you could ask. I use a tool that does that. But you could, I suppose, pick up scenarios and give them examples and say, okay, it's the end of the quarter. You're being squeezed to get a deal. You've got your client, your proposal out there. How would you handle X, Y, and Z? So I think for me, I would have to give some thought to that so that the question was worthy. But there would be lots of scenarios that you could place.
Sue, do you have a perspective on that in terms of how do you flush out people's perspectives around, it might be money or it might be other scenarios, other ways that you can kind of, frame your questions?
It's really the same as Bernadette, those scenario types of questions. I'd probably just ask directly, tell me about money. And keep it really open. What's your thoughts about it? And just sort of see what they would not expect probably something like that, but quite possibly you could learn quite a bit from a very open question.
Kristen, I think what you could also ask is, what would you consider a lot of money? I think that question in itself, for everybody could ask their people that. You know, what would you consider is a lot of money?
And one question that I like to listen to how the candidate answers the question and how they say what they say as well as what they actually say. And a very general question that you can really delve into is, take me through a deal you're really proud of and why. And you learn a lot about the candidate in that, if they talk about their team, or they talk about them, or they talk about the deal, or they talk about the value. You can really get under the bonnet of the person by opening with a really general question like that.
Great, thank you so much. And quick round of applause for our panel. Thank you very much, guys.